Okay, hopefully this is just going to be a quick little video about how to use equations and make them when there's a story along with it, right? So we're just going to read the story. Your neighbor, Mrs. Butterworth, is saving for a trip to Disney. She is selling pancakes to raise funds for the trip. After 20 pancakes, she has $110. After 60 pancakes, she has $130. Write an equation to model the money that she has to save Y, where X is the number of pancakes. Okay, so there's a lot of information, and I think what will help me figure that information out is to always make a chart. So we've been doing that like all semester, this idea of using a table to organize our thinking. So in a table, I don't like that line, there's usually an X and a Y here. It always goes alphabetically, the X and then the Y. And if you didn't know that, you could still figure out that the story is about two things. That's why we spent all that time going over independent and dependent variables. So the X and the Y are the two things that we're being asked about is Y, which is her savings, and X, which is the number of pancakes. So really, to make this story meaningful, I need to put money in there somewhere, and I need to put pancakes. That's the story. There's a relationship somehow between how much money she saves, and that's dependent, I think, on the number of pancakes that she's going to sell. So usually we put the independent variable, the pancakes, is going to control how much money she has. So if I want to put words in there, I totally can, and then I'm going to label it XY because that's always alphabetical. And then if you notice, X represents pancakes, which exactly is what it said in the story, and Y represents the money that she's got to save. So that's super consistent. So whether you knew to put X and Y there right off the bat and then match the word, or whether you tried to think about it as independent and dependent variables, and independent is your input, your money is your dependent, you could do it that way too. And then I just have to find it with information. So the first sentence says, after 20 pancakes, she has $110. So it would make sense to put 20 pancakes are worth $110. And then naturally, we even have something to follow up with, which I'll switch to blue. After 60 pancakes, she has $130. So it makes sense to also put 60 here and then 130, right? So from here on out, if it says to write an equation, well, I can do that. All I have is a chart. In order to write information from a chart, I have to decide whether it's point slope or slope intercept, right? So point slope, or I could do slope intercept. Either way, no matter what, I always have to find slope. It's in both of the formats. So I can do that by just figuring out how fast this is changing. So she's making $20 and this is growing by 40. I'll put a plus sign there. And so the slope is 20 over 40, which I can reduce to 2 over 4, which I can reduce to 1/2. So whether you keep it as 20 over 40 or 1/2, it's totally up to you. Maybe I'll just keep 20 over 40 so you can see it in the equation, right? So now my choice is point slope or slope intercept. Remember, slope intercept, I better have the intercept. If I don't have the intercept, I cannot write it in this format. So the intercept is when I have a 0 over here. I don't have a 0 somewhere in this side of the chart, so I can't write it in this format, so I'm going to use point slope. So the slope I already know, that's the 20 over 40. And now I'm just going to choose a point, whatever point I like. I'm just going to pick 20, 110 because that's the first one that's in the chart. And the numbers are smaller. I like smaller numbers. So 20, 110, straight from the chart in the same order that I see it. I've got a point, I've got a slope. So writing the equation in point slope should be pretty straightforward. So all equations begin with Y. The Y goes with the Y value here. So I'm going to switch the sign. Equals. Always after the equal sign is the slope. In point slope, I need a parenthesis, which has an X in it. The X goes with the X and change the sign again. And now I go back to the prompt. Write an equation. Did I have an equation? Yep. So I can just leave it like this. Looks good to me. I can do other things too. I can distribute this and rewrite it in a different format if I wanted to. I could graph it on Desmos and use that to make some predictions, but all I needed was the equation, and I got it. So check mark to me, A+, Mrs. Moon. Oops, too far. Okay, hope that helps and that's clear.